You're just a blind, useless anchor dragging me down. Olivia's voice cut through the cold, heavy air of our living room, accompanied by the sharp slap of paper hitting my chest. I couldn't see the sheets of paper as they scattered across the hardwood floor, but I knew exactly what they were. The heavy, suffocating scent of her expensive designer perfume mixed with the sharp, woody smell of Julian's cologne, standing just inches behind her in the dark. I stood frozen in the pitch blackness of my own eyes, listening to my wife of 3 years laugh softly as she demanded that I sign away my entire life and get out of her sight forever. Just sign it, Christian, don't make this any more pathetic than it already is, Julian muttered, his voice dripping with amusement. I could hear the rustle of his expensive suit as he stepped closer, his hand resting on Olivia's shoulder. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the steady, mocking tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. I reached out with a trembling hand, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of the pen Olivia was forcing into my grip. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of giving her everything I had, and it was all ending in the dark. Is this really what you want, Olivia? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, keeping my head turned toward where I thought her face was. I wanted to hear her say it, to hear the woman I had saved from a burning car confirm that I was nothing to her. There was a brief pause, a momentary hesitation that made my heart beat with a tiny, foolish hope. But then, she let out a cold, impatient sigh. I'm tired of playing nurse to a man who can't even look me in the eyes, Christian. Vanguard Designs needs a leader, not a charity case. I didn't say another word. I simply bent down, my knees scraping against the cold floor as my hands searched for the papers. Once my fingers found the smooth surface of the contract, I pressed the pen to the signature line I had memorized after weeks of Olivia complaining about our finances. With a swift, clean motion, I signed my name, relinquishing my rights to our home, my shares in the company, and the woman I had loved. I stood up, gripped my folding white cane, and walked toward the door, leaving the papers on the floor behind me. The door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the warm air of the penthouse and leaving me in the freezing night rain. The cold water soaked through my thin jacket within seconds, but I barely felt it as I tapped my cane against the concrete steps. I had no destination, no money, and no one left to turn to. I was just a blind man walking into the dark, with nothing but a small suitcase containing a few old clothes and the memories of a life that had just been erased. I made it to a park bench a few blocks away, the sound of the rain hitting the leaves above me like 1,000 tiny needles. As I sat there shivering, the sound of footsteps echoed on the wet pavement, stopping directly in front of me. I held my breath, my hand tightening on my cane, expecting a stranger or a mugger. Instead, the familiar scent of Julian's expensive cologne filled the damp air, and a heavy envelope was dropped onto my lap. Olivia thinks you've gone to a shelter, but I wanted to make sure you stay gone, Julian whispered, his voice low and threatening. I could hear the rustle of a heavy umbrella shielding him from the downpour. There's $10,000 in that envelope. Take it and leave the city. If I ever see you near Olivia or the office again, I will make sure you end up in a state institution. Do you understand me, Christian? I did not answer him. I simply sat there, my face dripping with rain, staring into the blackness of my eyes. Julian let out a disdainful laugh, tapped his umbrella against the pavement, and walked away, leaving me alone in the freezing dark. I reached down and touched the thick envelope on my lap, my fingers tracing the edges of the paper. I didn't want his money, but I knew I had to survive. I kept the envelope hidden in my pocket, deciding right then that I would never speak his name, or Olivia's, until I was ready. How did I end up on the sweat park bench, discarded like trash by the woman I had sacrificed my life for? 3 years ago, I was a rising star in the architectural world, my name spoken in the same breath as the city's legendary builders. I had a vision, a passion for creating structures that felt alive, and I had Olivia. She was a junior designer at a struggling firm, beautiful, ambitious, and completely out of my league, or so I thought. We were driving home from a celebration dinner, the night I proposed to her, when the headlights of a semi-truck crossed the median. In that split second, as the metal screamed and the glass shattered, I didn't think about my career or my future. I only thought of her. I threw my body across the console, shielding Olivia with my own frame as the truck crushed the driver's side of our car. I woke up weeks later in a hospital bed, wrapped in bandages and surrounded by a silent, terrifying darkness. The doctor's voice was gentle, but the words were a death sentence to an architect. The optic nerve was severely damaged in the crash, Christian. We did everything we could, but you are permanently blind. I remember the scream that tore from my throat, the absolute panic of realizing I would never see a blueprint, a building, or the face of my new fiancé again. Olivia was there, holding my hand and weeping, promising that she would be my eyes forever. For the first year, she kept that promise, or at least she pretended to. She brought me my sketchpads, and I would guide her hand, explaining the angles, the load-bearing calculations, and the aesthetic details of my unfinished projects. She took those designs to the board of Vanguard Designs, presenting them as her own work to save the company from bankruptcy. The board was stunned by the genius of the layouts, and Olivia was promoted to senior partner overnight. But as the company grew, and my designs turned Olivia into a wealthy, celebrated CEO, her attitude began to shift. The warm, comforting wife who used to read me the newspaper slowly disappeared, replaced by a cold, distant stranger who stayed late at the office. She began leaving me alone in the penthouse for days, ashamed to bring a blind husband to the high society galas where she was being toasted. And then, Julian arrived. Julian was hired as her executive assistant, a charming, slick-haired opportunist who immediately saw Olivia's vanity as a ladder to success. I could hear the change in her voice whenever she spoke about him, the soft, excited tone that she used to reserve for me. Soon, Julian was visiting our home, his footsteps echoing in our hallway late at night while I lay awake in the master bedroom, pretending to sleep so I wouldn't have to face the truth. I knew they were whispering about me, plotting to get rid of the blind man who had served his purpose. My designs had built Vanguard's empire, but I was no longer needed. I had become an embarrassment, a liability to their perfect image. And so, they threw me out into the cold rain, thinking I would quietly fade away and die in some forgotten corner of the metropolis. I spent my first night in a decrepit motel in the poorest district of the city, the walls smelling of damp mold and old tobacco. The $10,000 Julian had given me sat on the bedside table, a constant reminder of my humiliation. I lay on the creaking bed, staring at the ceiling I couldn't see, listening to the sirens wailing in the streets below. I was broken, but I was not dead. A quiet, cold anger began to take root in my chest. The next morning, I used my cane to navigate the unfamiliar, cracked sidewalks of the lower district, searching for a clinic. My eyes had been burning with a sharp, stabbing pain for weeks, a symptom the expensive private doctors Olivia paid for had dismissed as phantom nerve pain. I walked into a small, crowded community clinic, the air smelling of cheap disinfectant and lavender. "Sit down, please. I'll be with you in just a moment," a soft, calm voice said from across the counter. It was Dr. Sophia. Her voice possessed a gentle strength that immediately made me feel safe. She guided me to an examination chair, her hands warm and incredibly gentle as she touched my temples. Unlike the doctors in the wealthy district, she didn't rush. She took her time, examining my eyes with a quiet focus. "Who did your initial surgery after the crash?" Sophia asked, her tone suddenly turning serious. I told her the name of the prestigious surgeon Olivia had hired, a man who charged thousands of dollars an hour. I heard Sophia let out a soft, sharp breath, the sound of her pen scratching against a clipboard. "Christian, the optic nerve was not severed in the crash. It was compressed by a small bone fragment. A fragment that should have been removed during the first operation." I froze in the chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What are you saying, Sophia?" I whispered, my voice cracking. She leaned in closer, the scent of lavender washing over me. "I'm saying that with a highly precise, albeit risky surgery, there is a chance we can relieve the pressure. There is a chance you could see again. But I don't understand why the previous surgeon didn't do this. It was an obvious compression." A cold realization washed over me, a sickening wave of betrayal that made me want to scream. Olivia's surgeon had told us there was no hope, that I would be blind forever, and Olivia had insisted we accept the diagnosis and stop seeking second opinions. Had she known? Had she and her surgeon agreed to keep me in the dark so I would remain dependent on her, continuing to feed her designs while she controlled my life? I clamped my jaw shut, refusing to let the tears fall, and looked toward Sophia. "Perform the surgery," I said, my voice cold and steady, filled with a sudden, dark determination. "I have nothing left to lose, and everything to claw back." Sophia hesitated, explaining the risks of permanent infection and the high cost of the specialized equipment, but I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope Julian had given me. "Will this cover the initial costs?" I asked, placing the cash on the table. Sophia looked at the money, then back at my face. "It's enough for the clinic's surgical room and the anesthesiologist, but I won't charge you for my services, Christian. No one deserves to be left in the dark when there's a chance to bring them back." Within 3 days, I was lying on a cold metal operating table, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor, Sophia's warm hand holding mine until the anesthesia took over. The weeks of recovery that followed were a blur of pain and quiet conversations in the small room Sophia had helped me rent near the clinic. She came by every evening after her shift, checking my bandages, administering my eye drops, and reading to me from architectural journals. We talked for hours about my dreams of building structures that served the people, and her dream of opening a research clinic that wasn't controlled by greedy corporate boards. We grew closer with each passing day, a deep, unspoken bond forming between us in the quiet room. Sophia was the first person in 3 years who didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me as a partner, a brilliant mind trapped in a broken body. "You're going to do great things, Christian. I can feel it," she whispered one evening, her hand lingering on my shoulder. I kept my feelings hidden, knowing I had a mountain to climb before I could offer anyone a real future, but her warmth was the anchor that kept me from drifting into madness. The day to remove the bandages finally arrived, the small room filled with a tense, heavy silence. Sophia's fingers were steady as she snipped the gauze, slowly unwinding the layers of cotton from around my head. "Keep your eyes closed until I dim the lights, Christian," she instructed softly. I heard the click of the lamp, and then her gentle voice. "Okay, slowly open them." I fluttered my eyelids, a sharp, blinding light stinging my retinas. I winced, my eyes watering as I looked down at my hands. The blurry, gray shapes slowly began to resolve, the outlines of my fingers, the fabric of my trousers, the worn wooden floorboards. I raised my head, and my gaze locked onto Sophia. She was standing there, her short chestnut hair falling around her face, her hazel eyes wide with a mixture of hope and anxiety. She was beautiful, far more beautiful than the voice I had fallen in love with. I looked into the small vanity mirror on the dresser, staring at my own reflection for the first time in 3 years. My eyes, once closed and blind, were now a piercing, vibrant green, shining with a cold, intense light. The darkness was gone. I could see. I could see everything. "Thank you, Sophia," I said, my voice cracking as I looked back at her. She let out a sob of relief, throwing her arms around my neck, holding me tight. I hugged her back, but my gaze was fixed on the window, looking out toward the glittering towers of the wealthy district in the distance. The blind man they had discarded was gone, and in his place stood someone they would never expect. I decided to keep my recovery a secret, a ghost in the machine of the metropolis. With Sophia's help, I contacted a group of wealthy, independent investors who had been burned by Vanguard Designs in the past. I showed them my new architectural concepts, designs that made Vanguard's current projects look like amateur blueprints. Stunned by my genius, they agreed to back me, and quietly, we founded a new mega-conglomerate named Aegis Holdings. For 6 months, I worked 18 hours a day in a hidden office in the lower district, Sophia always by my side. We built Aegis from the ground up, acquiring small tech firms, real estate portfolios, and positioning ourselves to strike. I wore dark sunglasses whenever I went outside, pretending to still be the blind man with the cane, mapping out the city's corporate battlefield while my enemies celebrated their hollow success. Meanwhile, in the high-rise offices of Vanguard Designs, Olivia was beginning to feel the walls closing in. Without my secret sketches and calculations, the company's new project proposals were being rejected by the city planning board. The developers were complaining about structural flaws, and the investors were getting nervous. Olivia's glamorous life was turning into a nightmare of endless board meetings and screaming matches. "Why can't you design anything like the old projects?" Olivia screamed at her team, throwing a stack of blueprints across the conference room table. Julian stood in the corner, his face calm, but his mind working rapidly. He knew the company was sinking, and he had no intention of sinking with it. He stepped forward, whispering in Olivia's ear, convincing her that the only way to save Vanguard was to consolidate her shares into a trust he had set up. Olivia, desperate and blind to Julian's true nature, agreed to sign the paperwork. She trusted him completely, believing he was the only one who could navigate the financial crisis. But Julian's plan was far more sinister. He had structured the contract as a full, unconditional transfer of ownership, leaving Olivia with nothing but a mountain of corporate debt. Before Julian's betrayal was finalized, Olivia began to feel a strange, hollow panic. She realized she had no one to help her solve the structural issues in the new blueprints. She needed the blind man she had thrown away. She decided to track him down, thinking she could bribe him with a small allowance to design for her again, or perhaps she felt a fleeting pang of guilt. She obtained the address of the cheap apartment where I had stayed after leaving the motel. Olivia's expensive high heels clicked loudly on the dirty pavement of the lower district as she walked toward the dilapidated apartment building. She cringed at the smell of garbage and the shouting of the street vendors, pulling her silk scarf tighter around her neck. She climbed the creaking stairs to the 3rd floor and knocked sharply on the door of Unit 304. The door swung open, revealing a burly, middle-aged man in a stained tank top, holding a wrench. He looked at Olivia's designer clothes and expensive jewelry with a mixture of amusement and suspicion. "What do you want, lady?" he grunted. I'm looking for Christian, the blind man who lived here, Olivia said, trying to maintain her dignified, upper-class tone. Is he home? The tenant let out a loud, mocking laugh. The blind guy? He's been gone for months, lady. Packed his bags and cleared out, told the landlord he was starting a new life. Olivia's heart sank. Did he leave a forwarding address? A phone number? Nope, nothing, the man said, leaning against the doorframe. But he left a bunch of trash behind, told us to throw it all in the dumpster. Old photo albums, a dried-up wedding bouquet, a box of old love letters. He said he didn't want a single piece of his old life dragging him down. Said he wanted to erase every memory of the people who put him in the dark. Olivia stood frozen on the landing, the tenant's words hitting her like a physical blow. I had destroyed everything, every trace of our life together. I hadn't just moved, I had erased her. A sudden, terrifying sense of isolation washed over her. She turned and ran down the stairs, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she reached the street. When Olivia returned to the Vanguard headquarters, she walked into her executive office, only to find Julian sitting in her leather chair, his feet resting on her mahogany desk. A group of security guards stood behind him, their faces expressionless. Julian, what is the meaning of this? Olivia demanded, her voice shaking. Get out of my chair. Julian smiled, a slow, predatory grin that made Olivia's blood run cold. He tossed a document onto the desk, the same document she had signed the day before. It's my chair now, Olivia. You signed over all your shares, your assets, and your position as CEO to my holding company. Vanguard Designs belongs to me. You lied to me. Olivia shrieked, rushing toward the desk. That was a temporary trust. You stole my company. I didn't steal anything. You handed it to me on a silver platter, Julian laughed, waving his hand to the security guards. Please escort this trespasser out of the building. She no longer has authorization to be on the premises. The guards grabbed Olivia by the arms, dragging her out of the office as she screamed and kicked, her cries echoing through the glass hallway she had once ruled. Julian watched her go, laughing softly as he poured himself a glass of expensive whiskey. He thought he had one, that he was the new king of the city. But Julian was a salesman, not a builder. Under his arrogant, reckless management, Vanguard Designs collapsed within months. He embezzled millions, leaving the company unable to pay its creditors or finish its current construction projects. The board filed for bankruptcy, and the bank put the entire company up for a foreclosure auction. From my office at Aegis Holdings, I watched the collapse unfold with a cold, mathematical satisfaction. Sophia stood beside me, looking at the financial reports on the screen. It's time, Christian, she said softly, her hazel eyes shining with excitement. Vanguard is going to auction tomorrow morning. Buy it, I replied, my voice low and calm. Every share, every asset, every blueprint. Buy it all. At the auction, Aegis Holdings swept in like a phantom, outbidding the city's major developers and acquiring Vanguard Designs for a fraction of its original worth. The press went wild, speculating about the mysterious new billionaire owner of Aegis, a man who had never been seen in public without dark sunglasses. Olivia, now bankrupt, homeless, and living in a cramped, depressing rooming house, heard the news on a cheap radio. She was desperate. She had no food, no money, and no friends left. She realized the new owner of Aegis would need someone who knew Vanguard's history. She decided to go to the executive suite to beg the new billionaire CEO for her job back. She walked through the grand lobby of Vanguard, the building now bearing the Aegis logo. The employees looked at her with pity and disgust, the fallen queen begging for scraps. She was escorted to the top floor, the glass doors of the executive suite sliding open to reveal the familiar office, now sleek, modern, and smelling of lavender. Olivia entered the room, her eyes fixed on the large leather chair, which was turned toward the window, looking out at the city skyline. Sir, please, Olivia began, her voice trembling as she clasped her hands together. I know you bought Vanguard. I built that company. I know every client, every project. Please. I've lost everything. My husband, my career. I just need a chance to work here again, even as an assistant. The chair slowly began to rotate. Olivia held her breath, expecting to see an older, stern businessman. Instead, the chair stopped, revealing me in a tailored charcoal suit. I slowly reached up, took off my dark sunglasses, and placed them on the desk. Olivia gasped, her knees buckling as she stared at my face. Her eyes, wide in horror, locked onto my face. Once clouded and blind, my eyes were now a piercing, vibrant green, looking directly at her with a cold, terrifying intensity. "I can see everything now, Olivia," I said, my voice low, steady, and dripping with ice. "Especially your true face." Olivia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at me, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. "Christian, you can see? How is this possible? Did you think I would stay in the dark forever?" I asked, leaning forward, my green eyes locking onto hers. "You took my sight, you took my designs, you took my life, and you threw me out like trash when I was no longer useful to you. Christian, please. I didn't know." Olivia sobbed, taking a step toward the desk, her hands shaking. Julian manipulated me. He forced me to sign those papers. I always loved you. I did it all for us." "Save your tears, Olivia," I cut her off, my voice cold and hard. "I know about the surgeon you hired. I know you kept me blind to keep me dependent. I know about the affair. I know everything." I picked up my phone, pressing a button. "Security, please remove this trespasser from my office. And ensure she is blacklisted from every Aegis property in the country." "No. Christian. Please. Forgive me." Olivia screamed as two large guards entered the room, grabbing her by the arms. She thrashed against their grip, tears streaming down her face as they dragged her toward the door. "You can't do this to me. I'm your wife." "You signed the divorce papers, Olivia," I said coldly, turning my chair back toward the window, looking out at the city I had conquered. "You got exactly what you deserved." The door slammed shut, silencing her screams. I sat in the quiet office, the tension finally leaving my shoulders. I felt a warm hand rest on my shoulder, and looked up to see Sophia smiling down at me, her hazel eyes filled with pride and affection. "It's over, Christian," Sophia said softly. "No, Sophia," I replied, a small, genuine smile appearing on my face as I took her hand. "It's just the beginning." The transition of Vanguard Designs into the Aegis fold was not just a financial takeover, it was a complete purging of the corruption that Olivia and Julian had brought into the industry. Every contract was audited, every project re-evaluated under my direct supervision. Sophia and I worked late into the night, analyzing the structural flaws of the active construction sites. The engineers were astonished when I pointed out the load-bearing errors in the foundations of the Midtown Tower, errors that would have caused a catastrophic collapse within a decade. "How did you spot that so quickly, sir?" the lead engineer asked, his voice filled with awe. I looked at the blueprint, my green eyes tracing the lines I had once had to visualize in the absolute dark. "I've spent 3 years calculating these forces in my head," I replied quietly. "I don't need a computer to tell me when the balance is off." Meanwhile, Julian's attempts to flee the country with the embezzled funds were cut short. Aegis's legal team, working alongside the federal regulators, had frozen his offshore accounts hours before the auction. He was arrested at the municipal airport, dragged away in handcuffs while trying to board a private charter. The newspapers ran his mugshot on the front page, the slicked-back hair messy, the cunning eyes filled with panic. He had tried to play the master manipulator, but he was nothing but a common thief, and he would spend the next 15 years in a maximum security cell, reflecting on the empire he had tried to steal. Olivia's downfall was even more public. Denied entry to every design firm and high society venue in the city, she became a pariah. She tried to sell the luxury jewelry and handbags she had bought with Vanguard's profits, but the bank seized them to pay off the outstanding corporate debts she had unknowingly assumed. She was spotted by the local tabloids living in a small, damp room in the same lower district where she had once searched for me. The woman who had worn silk and diamonds was now seen carrying cheap groceries in the rain, her head bowed to avoid the cameras. Sophia and I went on to build the Aegis Research Clinic, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to providing advanced ophthalmic care to those who couldn't afford it. At the opening ceremony, I stood before the crowd of journalists and city officials, my sunglasses left in my pocket. I looked out at the faces, seeing the light, the colors, and the hope in the eyes of the patients we had already helped. "A building is only as strong as its foundation," I said into the microphone. "And the foundation of any community must be built on truth, sacrifice, and mutual support. We are here to bring light to those who have been left in the dark." As the applause echoed through the grand glass atrium, I looked down at Sophia, who was standing in the front row. Her hazel eyes were bright with tears, a warm, proud smile on her face. I knew that the road ahead would be filled with new designs, new challenges, and new structures to raise. But for the first time in my life, I was building a future that I could see with my own eyes, alongside the person who had helped me find the light. Every structure we designed at Aegis Holdings carried a signature of honesty. I refused to build the towering, exclusive monoliths that Olivia had favored. Instead, our projects focused on community centers, public libraries, and affordable housing complexes that incorporated sustainable materials and open, light-filled spaces. The City Planning Board, which had once rejected Vanguard's rushed proposals, now approved our blueprints without hesitation. The architectural community began to recognize a new era of design, one that was not about corporate vanity, but about human connection. Sophia's work at the clinic grew rapidly. She gathered a team of brilliant, young specialists who shared her vision of accessible healthcare. Together, they developed new surgical techniques that reduced the recovery time for compressed optic nerves, restoring sight to dozens of patients who had been told their condition was permanent. I would often visit the clinic in the evenings, sitting in the waiting room and listening to the stories of the families who had found hope within its walls. I realized that my survival, my pain, and even the betrayal I had suffered had led to this moment. The darkness had been a crucible, refining my purpose and showing me the true value of the light. One rainy afternoon, as I was leaving the Aegis headquarters, I saw a familiar figure standing near the public bus stop across the street. It was Olivia. She was wearing a faded, oversized coat, her dark brown hair damp and tangled from the wind. She looked at the towering glass facade of the building, her sharp eyes now dull and filled with a profound, lingering regret. She didn't see me standing under the canopy, shielded by the shadows of the entrance. She simply stared at the logo, the bold, silver Aegis symbol, before turning her back and walking into the cold rain, disappearing among the crowd of commuters. I felt no anger, no triumph, only a quiet, deep peace. The debt had been paid, the balance restored, and the past was finally behind me. I walked back inside, the warm air of the lobby welcoming me as the glass doors slid shut. Sophia was waiting near the elevators, holding a folder of new design proposals for our next community project. "Ready to look at the new layouts, Christian?" she asked, her warm hazel eyes shining with that familiar, comforting light. I smiled, taking the folder from her hand. "Let's see what we can build next, Sophia," I replied, my piercing green eyes clear and focused. Together, we walked toward the elevator, stepping into a future that was entirely of our own design. The days turned into weeks, and Aegis Holdings became the dominant force in the city's development. Our projects were featured in international journals, not for their height or their cost, but for the way they transformed the neighborhoods around them. I was invited to speak at universities, sharing my journey with the next generation of architects. Never design for the applause of the boardrooms, I would tell them. Design for the person who will walk through the door on a rainy night, looking for a place of safety. That is the true measure of an architect. And in every blueprint, in every concrete column and glass pane, I kept the promise I had made to myself on that wet park bench. I would never let the darkness return. I would continue to build, to see, and to protect the light that had been given back to me. The silence was gone, replaced by the vibrant, active sounds of a city rising from the foundations we had laid. With Sophia by my side, I knew that whatever challenges the future held, we would face them with our eyes wide open. Sophia's research at the clinic began to gain international recognition. She was invited to present her findings at global medical conferences, sharing the techniques that had restored my sight. I traveled with her, standing in the back of the auditoriums, watching her speak with that same gentle, focused passion that had saved me in the community clinic. She was no longer the ignored doctor in the poor district, she was a pioneer in her field, bringing hope to thousands of people around the world. And in every presentation, she showed a slide of my green eyes, a testament to what was possible when you refused to give up on someone in the dark. The final night of our tour, we sat on the balcony of a hotel overlooking a rainy city across the sea. The lights of the metropolis reflected off the wet streets, creating a shifting, beautiful tapestry of color. I held a glass of warm tea, listening to the sound of the rain hitting the glass, a sound that no longer brought back memories of isolation. Sophia leaned against the railing beside me, her short chestnut hair damp from the mist. "What are you thinking about, Christian?" she asked softly. "I'm thinking about how far we've come," I replied, turning my head to look at her. "And how beautiful the world is when you can finally see it." She smiled, her hazel eyes reflecting the city lights. "It is beautiful, Christian. And we're going to keep making it better." We stood there in the quiet night, watching the rain fall, ready for whatever the next day would bring. The silence was no longer a punishment, it was a peaceful sanctuary, a space we had carved out of the noise of the world. A space built on truth, love, and the sight we had found together in the dark. The return to our home metropolis was marked by the launch of our largest project yet, the Metropolis Civic Center. It was a massive undertaking, a structure that would integrate public transit, green spaces, and community services into a single, cohesive design. The project was the culmination of everything I had learned, a physical manifestation of my architectural philosophy. I spent days on the construction site, wearing a hard hat, talking with the workers, and inspecting the steel beams as they were raised into the sky. The workers respected me, not just because I was the billionaire CEO of Aegis, but because I knew the details of their work. I could spot a misaligned bolt from 50 yards away, my green eyes scanning the structure with an intensity that missed nothing. "The boss has eyes like a hawk," I heard one of the steel workers whisper as I walked past. I smiled under my helmet. They didn't know the journey those eyes had taken, the years they had spent closed and useless, trapped in a world of shadows. The opening day of the Civic Center was a historic event for the city. Thousands of people gathered in the main plaza, the air filled with music and the laughter of children playing in the fountains. I stood on the main stage, looking out at the crowd, the bright sunshine warming my face. I didn't need to speak of the betrayal or the pain of the past. The structure behind me spoke for itself, a monument to resilience, built on the ruins of a stolen legacy. As I stepped down from the podium, I saw Sophia waiting for me at the edge of the stage. She didn't say a word, she simply reached out and took my hand, her hazel eyes filled with a deep, silent understanding. We walked through the plaza together, moving through the crowd, our steps steady and confident. The journey was complete, the battle won, and the future was ours to build. Every day at Aegis is a testament to the power of that choice. We continue to design, to build, and to heal, bringing light to the dark corners of the metropolis. The names of Olivia and Julian have been forgotten, washed away by the tide of progress we created. But the name of Aegis remains, a symbol of hope, strength, and the sight we found in the dark. And as the night falls over the city, and the lights of the buildings begin to glow like a field of stars, I look out from my window one last time. The grandfather clock ticks softly in the corner, a gentle, peaceful rhythm that marks the end of another day. I turn to Sophia, who is sitting at the table, her hazel eyes looking up at me with a warm, welcoming smile. I take her hand, step away from the window, and walk into the light of our home, completely free of the dark. The final phase of our Midtown project was completed on the anniversary of the auction. A massive public park, surrounded by low-rise, sustainable buildings that housed local businesses, libraries, and art galleries. At the center of the park stood a large bronze sculpture, a representation of two hands meeting, one guiding the other toward the light. It was a tribute to the path we had walked, a symbol of the connection that had saved my life. I stood before it, Sophia by my side, looking at the children playing on the grass, the families sitting on the benches, and the light filtering through the trees. "We did it, Christian," Sophia whispered, her hand tightening in mine. "We did, Sophia," I replied, my piercing green eyes reflecting the bright, golden light of the afternoon sun. "We built something that will last." This is the story of how my silence became my victory, and how the blind man they discarded became the architect of their downfall. It is a story of extreme regret for those who betrayed me, and a lifetime of light for those who helped me see. And as the screen fades to black, and the final music plays, I hope you remember that no matter how dark the night gets, the light is always waiting for those who have the courage to find it. Thank you for watching until the very end.